Hello, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I will get us underway on time and see a few people are still joining. And just to allow a little more time before we get this panel session underway, once again, a big thank you to our platinum sponsor, JBT, for supporting Cargo Connect over the next couple of days. We are going to move into a debate format for this session after the presentations we heard earlier on this morning. We are looking at advancing our industry into the 21st century. How do we develop airport infrastructure to ensure the great air cargo opportunity isn't squandered? And that was certainly a big push for us when we decided that we wanted to host this event. Our advisory panel very much encouraging us to get the major airport operators in and to hear from the community there at airports about how they'll react and adapt the facilities to meet the big opportunities for growth ahead. I'm delighted to introduce a glittering lineup of panelists from around the world. We are joined by Bill Nesbitt, who is Senior Manager Cargo at Dallas Fort Worth International Airport. Welcome to you, Bill.
Thank you, Max.
Good to have you along. We also have Henrik Ambach, who is SVP, Cargo Operations Worldwide at Emirates. Welcome to you, Henrik. Good to have you on board. We're joined by Gert Ertz, who's Director Cargo and Logistics at Brussels Airport. Welcome, Gert.
Thank you very much. Good being here.
Good to have you along. We have, who's next on my list? We have Steve Polmans, Chairman of the International Air Cargo Association, TIACA. Welcome to you, Steve.
Thanks, Max. Pleasure being here.
And we have Steven Verhasselt, who is VP Commercial at Liège Airport. Welcome to you, Steven.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you on board. And last but not least, we have Thomas Leipert, who is Managing Director, Asia Pacific Ground Support and Gate Equipment at JBT Aerotech. Welcome to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Max. Thank you.
Right, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining. Before we get this underway, this is very much an interactive session, ladies and gentlemen of the audience. So you are encouraged, actively encouraged to drop your questions into the chat, into the Q&A forum next to the chat icon at the bottom of your screen. It has two speech bubbles. Don't be shy. Drop anything you want to ask of the panel in there and we will come to your questions throughout. We've got a couple of live polls as well that we're going to ask you to vote in, but it is a interactive one, this one. So please do be forthcoming with your questions. Drop them in that Q&A area and I will facilitate those. I'm going to ask the panel, just to begin with, what's your overall assessment of the current suitability of airport infrastructure and what perhaps are the priority areas you think we need to see an improvement in? And I'll go with the order that I introduced you. So I'll come to you first, Bill.
Sure. I think, that's going to be very variable by airport and obviously what infrastructure investments they've made recently. But I think when you work outwards from the airport, you think about the first thing is ramp parking. How many freighter positions do you have? How many what are you operating a major belly hub, or are you operating a heavier freighter operation? That ramp parking is the first point of critical infrastructure. Then when you look at going outward from there, you've got warehouses where you need to have quick access with truck courts, with the ability to flow the cargo through and handle those trucks in the warehouses. At DFW, this is where we feel like digitization is a real opportunity with cargo community systems that allow slot bookings at the cargo warehouses, and then you expand even further out from there and you start to talk about roadways and access to the airport. What can we do there? We try to separate truck flows from passenger flows. We try to look at more innovations, things like smart traffic lights, maybe waiting areas for the trucks, rather than queuing up in the truck court, have a waiting area until a slot is assigned. So these kinds of concentric circles that expand out from ramp and continue to go out into the communities.
Thank you, Bill. I'll come to you next, Henrik. Particularly your perspective there as an airline, as a user, on what you see as your current assessment and the opportunities, the challenges we need to address.
Well, Max, that's an almost impossible question because there will be
No, but and I mean it like this because there's airports where you're going to say thumbs up, well done, great stuff, and there are airports where you say, oh my God, why don't they have the fundamental things in place? And you can almost say the same for every region in the world. So you cannot even say that there's one region that uniquely stands out. So honestly speaking, and operating to all continents, it's a very difficult question to answer because, as I said, there are some places where they're doing a fantastic job, I really mean it, and there are some places where you just sit back and say, "Oh, really?" So I think it's anywhere from hero to zero.
And what do you notice about where they are fantastic jobs going on, and is there any sort of habits and behaviours that you would note from those kind of airports, Henrik?
Well, it's mostly airports, of course, that is centric in either production or logistics centric places, where it is part of that economy, and it's an important part of what that airport is contributing to its surroundings. We'll come to that discussion a little bit later, I guess, quite automatically on who is actually driving. But one of the challenges you have is that an airport has a confined space, in particular a confined space that has airside, landside access, which is the critical. They prefer car parks and all kind of other things instead of giving it away to logistics. Logistics business is not necessarily interesting for the airport company itself, but it's a huge financial and economic activity generator for the surrounding environment. And there is sometimes a disconnect between the greater societal interest and the airport operating company's short-term profit targets.
Thank you, Henrik. Steve, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Yeah, I can only confirm what Bill and Henrik said. And one of the big changes, of course, is with airports that are purely P&L driven, have private equity, are more short-term focused on the direct revenue of passengers, do not see the benefit for the region on the economics, which is different with airports that have more like government-owned or have a different P&L focus. But I think the most difficulty is that in each of the categories, you have good examples. You have airports doing a good job. You have airports still needing to take care of a lot of things. And we also need to make a differentiation on what happens within the fence, which is for a lot of airports like a direct responsibility. I think that airports should also focus more on what's happening outside the fence, and which is still under their direct control and where they can have a huge impact. And I think that is an area for improvement where there are good examples, but unfortunately also a lot of bad examples.
Thank you, Steve. And Stephen, I'll come to you for your opening thoughts.
Okay, well, I think what's the overall assessment? To me, it's important to have the physical and the digital flow to have them at the same pace. It's great when everything goes really fast through the airport, but if then I don't know it blocks at the cargo importation or at the customs or whatever, then it's no use, and the other way around. So I know digitization is the focus here, but I'm really convinced that it should be balanced, that both the physical flow and the digital flow should be the same. And what I learned from my customers is that that it's not about top speed and not about speed records. It's more about reliability and predictability of your flows. If you say that your cargo comes out in 4 hours time, it should be 4 hours, can be 3.5, can be 4.5, but it cannot be 1 hour one day and 20 hours the next day. So it's about reliability, predictability, and what we learned the last year as well is, of course, peak management. It's great to have all your capacity in place for your average dealing, but it's at the peak when it counts. It's when all of a sudden 10 freighters arrive in a couple of hours time. That's when it really counts, and I think that's what airport infrastructure should be looking at. But at the same time, it's the biggest challenge because it incurs overcapacity at downtime. So it's we need to be very clear in what we want to achieve and to strike a balance.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll come to you, Gert.
I think I underscore what is already said over here, and probably fall into repetition on some of the comments, but truly looking at the connected and integrated airport infrastructure is something that's key, both in the digital space, but also in the physical space. And with the role of an airport providing such managing and supporting the long-term strategies of the operators over there, whilst they are obviously being challenged with the short-term cyclicalities of things, such as the recent growth and the surge of growth that we've seen in the last 18 months, obviously poses a lot of challenges and stresses the infrastructures as well as the needs for good visibility and digital processes that actually provide that view on the flow and help. And I think their digitalization definitely can manage the short-term needs and challenges, or help manage those, and providing the right and connected infrastructures as an airport will definitely help to towards a sustainable growth path for all operators on that airport. So I think that's where the challenges are going to be, is to indeed balance those 2 points very well, and making sure that the short-term opportunities and short-term challenges of growth turn into a long-term sustainable opportunity and growth pattern for all.
Thank you, Gert. I will come to you, Thomas. Give us a GSE manufacturer's perspective on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Max. As a GSE manufacturer, it's the airport infrastructure are always very important, but like Henrik was saying, we have very, very good airports, and like some airports need to improve, their facilities. The major challenge, I think, is like linked to the previous presentation from DHL. It was really like about the electrical, infrastructure, and this is for GSE manufacturer is one of the key point right now, a big challenge that we are facing right now in the region, and so this is my takes.
Okay, thank you all for your opening thoughts on that one. We are now very much open for your questions, so do drop any you have into the Q&A icon there at the bottom of your screen. I'm just going to ask, and fingers on buzzers here really, many of you mentioned the D word, digitization, as an opportunity here. Can we have a little bit more of a comment, I guess, on some particularly effective pieces of digitization that you think airports could help facilitate? Gert.
Well, I think it was mentioned before also by Bill and Dalsford that providing the ability for slot bookings on the handler side and the forwarder side is something that, at least from a Brussels Airport perspective, we've been driving for a few years now through our ProCloud applications, and more recently through the rollout of the digital green lane with the community at Cargo Belgium. We have selected 4 applications that we will go for 100% user adoption by all, and get to a point that this becomes customary and mandatory to use at an airport, truly to provide that good visibility for resource planning and optimization of the process. And I think that's where we are when we talk about digitization today. It's all about digitalizing the current processes, starting from landside process, but hopefully soon also the airside process to that. Once you get there, you can grow from there. Then you can start working on your data and get more analysis out of that, get more predictive on the anticipated surges of growth or the day-to-day cyclicality of demand. But that's, I think, more holistically and broadly in the industry where we are at today, is we're truly in the stage of connecting the digital flows and or making the processes digitally. And then the next step is connecting those digital flows with each other, so to create full visibility in the digital space for all the operators on the ecosystem on an airport.
And what sort of performance improvement do you think that will enable there if that is delivered to plan?
Well, if you look at some recent examples of challenges that you have, is there's every day is very different. And what today you can be handling 2 aircraft 747s, and tomorrow there could be 6 on your ramp unannounced, or with a 24 hours or 12 hours notice. And that's where your the unpredictability from it at this point in time makes it very, very challenging to make sure that you that you're able to meet your 3.5 hours or 4 hours, as Steven said, waiting times for your cargo being processed and handled. And that's due to the lack of talent there that you then not have available, and the lack of people that you don't have available, or resources that you don't have available at that point in time. If you can A, create that visibility better, and B, get some more predictability behind it by connecting the different process flows with each other, you definitely is going to help optimizing your throughput times as well as your resource planning. Both from reliability, this will improve, but also from an operational efficiency, man loading your requirements better.
I saw you nodding, sort of wry smile when Stephen mentioned about 10 freighters suddenly arriving in a couple of hours. So it's that kind of sudden, unpredictable change in the schedules that digitisation should theoretically more reaction time too, right?
Yeah, well, the short term will always be there, and there will always be you'll always be surprised by some last minute requests, so to speak. But it's more the overall time frame that you need to look at. There will always be some management of short term requests that were unpredictable or unexpected. But again, having that visibility and have your flows optimized and digitalized, at least will allow you to better create visibility and manage the unpredictability as well.
Thank you, guys. Throw that open to other panelists, but some comments around digitisation, perhaps some of the challenges and the common pitfalls that an airport might experience when trying to develop it. Bill.
Sure. So I would say that from a challenge standpoint, just community adoption, right, is one of the things that takes some time. Managing change management throughout multiple organizations, because you're not just dealing with a single organization that can dictate something from the top down, but you've got this whole ecosystem of handlers, airlines, trucking companies, freight forwarders. So it's a big challenge to get all these people on the same page, right?
What kind of, can you share with us some of the common issues you have with that community adoption, Bill?
So from an adoption standpoint, it's just kind of about change management, right? Everybody has a specific way that they like to do things, and to get them to do things a similar way as maybe a competitor isn't always easiest sell that you're going to adopt the same process as a competitor, for an example.
Throw that across to any of the other panelists there, Thomas, Henrik, Stephen. Your thoughts on digitisation and perhaps some of the comments of Henrik.
Yeah, but you could say that, of course, and it's said already a couple of times, this thing with slot management system, so the local last mile interconnection is important. But I think airport authorities has a role to play also in making the different authorities interconnectable. I mean, we've discussed digitization in a broader sense is almost a disaster. That still today, while we may have an electronic airway bill, we still need an invoice. We need a certificate of origin with a rubber stamp and a blue signature, not a black signature, but a blue signature. Health certificates and all kind of other certificates that has to go along with the shipment. That then has to be brought to an authority, and probably in many cases, not just to one, but to several authorities. So, of course, airport companies are not legislators, and while you could beg, pray, and almost feel like revolutionizing, that somebody has eventually to make governments wake up and take digitalization serious when you talk about the movement of goods. At least airport companies could take, which happens in some cases very positively, the role of creating interaction between the actual authority players at that specific airport, and by that make that.
Oh, I think we may have just lost Henrik on there. We'll try and get him back. Steve, are you okay to continue on some of those points?
I think I will jump on what Henrik was saying, because for me, there are three areas where an airport can play an important role when it comes to digitization. And I think one is basic infrastructure. As a government investing in roads so we can all drive around, I think airports need to make sure there is basic infrastructure. It's nice to have Wi-Fi in the terminal for the passengers. we need the same kind of digital infrastructure on the cargo side. Second, and that absolutely confirms what Henrik said, is that airports are very often very well connected to governments. They have a role to play when it comes to lobbying and making things more digital, paperless towards their governments. Is it customs? Is it other authorities? And there, each airport can play a certain role, which I think is today left too many to some global organizations which are further in the row or further distance to those local governments. And I think the third one where airports can play a role is in everything to do with cross-company processes. Each company can perfectly invest and see what is perfectly placed for them when it comes to digitization. But as a very fragmented industry, we still have a lot of waste between the different stakeholders. And that is where an airport can indeed play a role, bringing companies together and overcoming that challenge of the cross-company processes. And I think that confirms also a little bit what Bill said on that community approach. And then it comes a lot about change management, about digital maturity of the market. I don't want to say that cargo is in the Stone Ages, but if you want to go from a long time ago to the future, you can't do that in one day. So taking in mind the digital maturity of a market and then the change management on how to proceed, there again, I think an airport is perfectly placed to take up an important role for that local community.
Thanks. So start, Henrik, we lost you a little way through.
Yeah, I had
I think we got you back.
In these digital agencies, my Wi-Fi doesn't work the way it should. It's phenomenal. I don't know where I dropped out. So
that's all right. We got most of the point, and then I just asked Steve to pick up, and he kind of reinforced. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add. No, we're okay. We'll go from there. Stephen, can I come to you on this one, just reflecting on some of those comments?
Well, I agree. Well, there's two things. I think number one, very important, is to say that that the digital adoption of the cargo flow at the airport, it's the cargo community, and I think it's very important to have your government bodies on board. So they are an integral part of the cargo community, be it customs, be it the guys at the laboratory for the live animals, be it the guys who control the perishables, and so on and so on. They are, and that's something that we have to. They are the barrier, but they are not the enemy. Meaning through digitization, they can do their work more efficiently, which in the end has a positive effect on all the good guys, and knowing that at all our airports and in all our companies we only have good guys, it means that things are gonna get better when we can encourage these organizations to work with us and to fully adopt this digitization as well. And of course, there are regional differences. Let that be very clear. I think there are big differences. For us as an airport, we can only do it on our own local patch in our home game, and I think it's the airlines, and I'm sure Henrik knows 1,000 times better than me. It's the airlines who only realize how big the differences are between all these airports. And then secondly, on the fact that the digitization, for me, it is indeed part of the basic infrastructure, and an airport is an infrastructure provider, and the basic infrastructure used to be the runway, the parking, the warehouse, and the fuel, and now the digital environment has to be part of it. And as always, a lot of more can be done, and always comes down to return on investment, and as it is difficult to exactly define where this return is going, it's not always easy to convince those who decide to allocate the resources that are necessary. But I think that's just part of our job and how we deal with it. But I agree, it's the infrastructure, and it has to be an effort of the community, and the community includes government bodies. That is the only way forward.
Thank you, Stephen. And we'll come back to that ROI question and pay. Do want to get into that a little bit later on. Just come to Thomas. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, definitely. But this is where we are trying to fit, is like, you know, with the digitalization, we're trying that our machine can communicate with all the infrastructure in all the airports. So we have some new system, you know, on each machine, called IOPS. Okay, it's kind of a telemetrical system that it can, you know, communicate and get data from the machine, but also from outside. And I think this is very important for the future of the airports, but also for the cargo handler and grain handler also, is to give them like a kind of a preventive maintenance, you know, data. And this is where we are working now on the digitalization. So it's like we try to be in the middle of this digital environment that is coming in some airports. And like I say again, like Henrik and Stephen, some are very progressing very fast. Some are still behind, but I think this is the future of the airport industry.
Thanks, Thomas. We talked there, and you kind of touched on the role of airports almost as facilitators and conduits for getting stakeholders, you know, together and aligned on the issue of digitization. What should the wider community be doing on this issue? What's not the responsibility of the airports, but what should we expect freight forwarders, airlines, handlers, suppliers to be bringing to this? Thomas, do you want to go first on?
Oh yeah, it's a big, not easy. It's not an easy question, definitely. I think it's a big. We need to have like all stakeholders, but I think everybody are on the same page. But somebody needs to invest somewhere. You know, like I think like when we can see like in the airport, we are like very advanced. Is like the push are coming from the state itself. Okay, especially for the infrastructure, you know, for the electrical infrastructure and everything. So the push is really like something we have to lobby. Like a lot of things happening in some other country in my area, like in South Korea, but it's really something that we need to talk to the government, to the local agency, to work together and to improve the infrastructure of airports.
Thanks, Thomas. Steve.
Max, I think I think the airport versus the stakeholders, I think the most important why you need a community is that if you as an airport invest in systems for the community, you need somebody to start using them. You don't want to impose it on your stakeholders. You want together to move forward. And what you see is that a lot of these fragmented companies only focus on their own short-term P&L. Let's fight for our slice of the cake. A lot of the investments an airport does are how can we grow the cake and how can we make it more efficient? And for me, unfortunately, if a company, and it's not about an investment even, it's about using existing technology. If it is something that gives them 0.1 benefit compared to their competitors, they're open to it. If it is something that generates 5% efficiency gain for everybody, then it doesn't give them a competitive advantage, and it's much more difficult to get them convinced starting systems. And I think that we as an industry and all these fragmented players, there's a lot of waste in the chain that is not within the four walls of a company, but on the different handover points. And if we as an industry can focus a little bit on that waste in the chain, and nobody is responsible for it, but we all suffer from it, I think there's a lot of gains that can be found. And I think that's again where an airport and a community can play a role, convincing stakeholders, guys, this is for the common good. This is good for everybody. And that's the balance between community and companies.
Thanks, Steve. Any comments? Go. Would you like to make a comment on that? Bill, I'll come to you in a second. Just come on mute. I mean, can you share with us how, you know, leading that into, you know, the mechanism, trying to get the community together there at Brussels, and you do have competitor companies, you know, we're there, and you know, how do you get those guys to work as part towards a collective goal?
Yeah, I think you already said it. It's defining what's the collective goal there. I think your change management starts from right from the beginning, where you're going to think even about digitizing some of the process or bringing in features or functionalities that can improve each one of their lives. I think the role of the community cannot be underestimated of that. As an airport, you can promote it, you can facilitate it, you can be the one taking the actions or the lead into development with them. But in the end, it needs to be carried by the community of operators and see the benefit. I think the challenge in that as a whole is that once you have the tools rolled out, you will always roll out a tool that's conceived and developed along requirements by most of them, but made specific, and then people will start comparing it from an airport perspective. They will start comparing it with how they use it differently at other airports. Think about some of the companies that reside on one airport. They have a network of locations where they want to define their own standards. So how do you make the digital tools that you are developing specifically at one airport, how do you make them work for and communicate with the in-house developed digital initiatives that some of the operators have taken? Are they communicating effectively with each other? So you get sometimes into that discussion, making them agnostic enough, making them geared around the data rather than around specific features, but making them interconnected or interconnectable is one of the key elements that we need to be all vigilant about, and that will help us throughout the change management, so that if it works at one airport, connecting with different tools that are available there, that they also can be manageable with different tools being used at other airports or the different ecosystems.
Thank you. Bill, I'll come to you.
Sure. So I think there's two roles when we talk about the community, right? One is, as we've talked about with the digitization and embracing change management, Gert made a great point, willing to invest in digital connections to community systems to help cargo flow through the airport, because they're all going to get an advantage of that. And then I think the second one is really, to Heinrich's point, of marching together as one voice with the industry when we speak to governments about getting rid of some of these paper transactions that have to be handed off. The original number 2 copy of the airway bill needs to be there to be cleared in certain countries, right? Or you need a blue signature versus a black signature. These are things that barriers to trade that need to be knocked down, and the community can speak as one voice through organizations like Steve's. Be honest, like TIACA is one of those organizations that where everybody can join together and speak as one voice in some of those efforts. So I think that's one of the key things that everybody could do together.
Thank you, Bill. Can we load up? We've got a couple of polls that we want to ask the delegates out there to vote on. If we could get one of those ready to go. We've got 2. So we're going to ask you to vote on these 2 live polls. So question 1, how effective do you believe airports are in providing an environment culture that enables you to deliver on your cargo growth plans? You've got 4 options there. And if you could vote on our second question, many airports are now focusing on cargo. Is this a short-term opportunistic move, or do they realise that this also contributes to sustainable business growth, making them less vulnerable compared to focusing just on packs? So we will allow you to vote on that. I think we might have momentarily lost Thomas, so I'll come back to him in a moment. Gentlemen, what do you believe? There you are, Thomas. I will come to you first. I've got one for you around, you mentioned sustainability, I believe, and the importance of that topic in your opening statement. I'd like to get your thoughts on that one and the role you see the airports playing in that. But also, can you talk to us about another trend, which is GSE pooling, and your thoughts on that one too? So I'll lob 2 at you, Thomas, please.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I don't know. There is a big storm in Singapore right now, so it's for that.
We're having some digitization issues ourselves this morning. But there we go.
Exactly. No, like pooling is arising. Definitely, we have a good example in Hong Kong. For Hong Kong is doing this type of scheme, and this is working very well. what we need to what as a GSC manufacturer, what we want is to provide you know, machine with very high reliability. So you know, at JBT we always say like easy to drive, easy to maintain, high reliability, and this is what is very important for the future. And also we want also to be a solution provider. So during the COVID-19 crisis, we developed, you know, some special products, you know, for the freighters, like the cargo chutes. We also have the Falcon loaders, and we also develop, you know, some option to improve the safety of the operators. You know, safety is still very key. It's still a key factors for ground handler. And we have now on our loaders, you know, the jet dock option. It's called like a kind of auto docking to really improve the safety of the operator in the aircraft for the last, you know, 5 or 10 meters. So this is like kind of an auto parking for the loader. Yeah, so this is something that we are working on, and the pooling strategy, I think, is like the person from DHL was saying, it's like the airport can project themselves for 25 years, 30 years, 35 years. That I think this is it can be a way also to have more investments and to be able to avoid to work as a silo on the silo mode. And this, I think, is very key for the future, and to have like some kind of a pooling success for different airports.
Excellent. So some other views from the panel on pooling, please. Who wants to take that one? Steve, you've come off.
I think that pooling is one of these examples where you can do something that is better for everybody. You will have more equipment available, less space, you can have better equipment, more modern equipment. But at the same time, you also have to realize that for a lot of ground handling agents, and you can't blame them, if you want to do a certain market protection, avoid too many competition coming in, or diversification, that you also are more than just a staff provider, equipment plays an important role. So there are a lot of hidden agendas often, and I've seen them in the past where stakeholders were not on board because of looking at their own environment and the risk for them in the long term. So I think, again, if you do that pooling as an airport, it's important that it is done together with all the stakeholders, and that it generates benefits for everybody. Because a lot of people, and often for the wrong reasons, are blocking such projects, not knowing exactly what is going to be the outcome for them. But I think pooling of equipment is scarce resources. Nobody can be against it.
Thanks, Steve. Any another view for you, Bill? Is that something you've looked at there, Dallas? You pooling an opportunity, do you believe?
So, you know, GSE on the ramp is always, it's a puzzle. It's a big piece of the puzzle, right? Pooling, our view is while it provides a lot of benefits, there is some complexity to the management of that, right? There are folks out there who do pooling as a, you know, as a job, or as that's their reason for existence, and we think it is probably better suited to having someone like that manage a pool for everybody and operating it as a concession and joint with the airport, right? So that you have one provider for the airport for the pooling resource.
Thank you, Bill. Good. Did you want to add something? I see you're off mute on pooling.
No, not really. Sorry.
No, okay, we'll pass now. What we'll do, shall we load up the results of our polls? Let's see whether we've got the results there. So question 1, we'd asked around rating the effectiveness of airports. You can see that most are in the middle, believe their airport is somewhat, the airports they work with, there'll be multiples, are somewhat effective or could improve. Question 2, we asked around airports obviously focusing on cargo, whether people believe they thought that was an opportunistic move, or do they realise that this is also contributes to sustainable business growth and making those airports less vulnerable, while compared to just focusing on packs. But interesting, most people felt on that one that airports will focus more on cargo, but it's too little, still too little. Steve, can I come to you on the results of those, particularly the second one? So, you know, do you concur with the majority on that this is a sort of short-term cargo's moment in the sun and airports will lose interest eventually? It's only going to be a fleeting thing?
Well, 1/3 said it was going to have a significant long-term impact. That's something I really, really want to believe. I'm going to take it with me, but I sincerely doubt. Coming back on a second answer, that it's going to have some impact, absolutely. I just hope that airports not only see what cargo can bring for them, but it also takes some responsibility. It's like having kids. If you want to have kids, you also have a responsibility. You need to pay for them, you need to send them to school, and you have to stick with them in the good days and the bad days. So if they want to have the benefits of cargo because it brings a benefit to an airport, that also means that they need to take up responsibility. That means invest in it, implement processes, procedures. I think if they would do that, I think we will also go to the third question or to the third answer, because then I think airports will realize what is in it for them. So if they would do only even that slight first step, I think we will also go to the last one, that they will do it in the longer term, because then they will experience it. So, but they have to do it in a good way and not an opportunistic way. I think that's the main challenge.
Thanks, Steve. Some other comments on that. I mean, around this issue of how sustained is airport interest going to be in this cargo opportunity? I'll come to you, Henrik, please. Do you get a sense that this is now it for the long run as a result of this pandemic, or would you concur with the poll results where you think it might only be a passing thing?
I would love to think it's for the long term, but being cynical by birth, I mean, it is probably, at least for now, there will be a lot of development, and you can see that in many places. I mean, just pick one place in the US, O'Hare or Chicago is overwhelmed. A smaller place like Rockford is you can say out of nowhere mushrooming, has been backed by UPS and Amazon already some years ago, but is now suddenly becoming an opportunity for the rest of us. So you see these things. Is that you can say the significant long-term trend? Not really, necessarily, at least. Nothing against Rockford, they're doing great effort. Just an example. But I think it's more also the role. What role is it airports play? And you have also, you can say, the discussion where does the financials come from? How much is done by the airport itself? And how much is the airport just making sure that there's a meaningful zoning plan for the, especially the airside, landside interface space, and that it is given away in a reasonable way so that the private investors can invest and develop facilities that make sense. In some airports, it's difficult to get in. I mean, Boston, staying in the North American space, is a beautiful example where it is very, very difficult to get anything built that makes sense, you can say, with an airside interface. Then you start to discuss remote facilities, and you have to truck in with handover facilities, which is obviously from an operational perspective not the preferred solution. So airport authorities, in our view, has a primary objective in ensuring that there's a meaningful zoning of the land, and then leave it to private operators to invest. And then, of course, the whole collective digitization effort we discussed before, but that's a different part of the conversation here. We're talking about more the hard part of the airport.
Thanks, Henrik. I'll come to Stephen next. I mean, your reflections on how much of a sustained long-term interest there'll be from airports in this cargo area as a result of this pandemic.
Coming from an airport that only invests in cargo, for me, it's a no-brainer. Although some investment was made in Liège into a passenger terminal 15 years ago, and I think still some people are regretting that investment. But as you know, I'm not only working for Liège, I also work on other projects with other airports a little bit around the world. And I really have the feeling that for the moment, cargo is the pick of the day, while I believe that it should be a long-term strategy, because the only way to make it work also financial wise is basically a long-term strategy. So it's not because all of a sudden there's a spike in demand or or there's a budget to be allocated because out of nowhere there have been budgets to support airports, and these budgets need to be allocated, and let's put something in cargo today because our passenger infrastructure is underused for the moment. That's not a cargo strategy. That's a good idea, and I support that. It's better than nothing, but it's not a cargo strategy. And then coming back also to what Henrik said is well, what's the revenue model of a cargo airport? People ask me many times, how can you work on cargo? Because if you really look at the financials and at the revenues from a flight, there's always going to be more revenues from a passenger flight than from a cargo flight. That's a fact. Nobody can deny that. So for me, the revenue model of a cargo airport is basically, it's a logistics real estate model. And so as an airport, the only way to make a cargo airport work is to make sure that you control the land around the airport. And that's not only the first line, that's not only the airside, landside, but also the land around it. If you as an airport can manage, number one, who gets access to this land, and number two, at what price and in what form. We have been experimenting a lot the last years in how do we do this, where you again need to strike the balance about what do I want to keep absolutely in my control, what can I afford based on my budget, and how can I keep control if I don't have the money to invest while I really need the infrastructure. It's a lot of interesting ways and models we've been toying with, but it's how it pays off, because in the end, as it was also mentioned by DHL before, as an airport, but also as an airline, when you invest into an aircraft, it's a 20 years deal. Well, when I allocate land in the airport, it's a 20 years deal. Or, for example, now with the Alibaba investment in Liège, it's a 50 years deal. And you need to get it right. You need to get it right on who, and you need to get it right on how much, because 50 years deals, well, you're not gonna make too many of them. When I was asked what is gonna happen after these 50 years, can we extend it for the next 49 years, I advised them to contact my grandchildren and negotiate with them. But it's just to show that it's really important to be in control and to have a long-term strategy.
I can't resist saying England can't even win a tournament in 55 years. So it's a long time. We need longer.
Well, it's still better to have won one than to not have won one, despite being called #1 football country in the world without ever winning anything. That's not a place where you want to be, and you can ask that to any Belgian, I guess.
Back to the topic, Steven.
Stick to the topic. Let's get back to the topic. We're in dangerous ground with football. You did bring it back to an important factor, though, and I said we come back and revisit this. So let's talk about now, which is money and making this pay. You make some really good points there about the financial challenges. Can I ask other panelists to comment on this issue of how do we make cargo pay? How does everyone, universally get a winning stake in the development of cargo offers? Who wants to go on that really tough one? Go, you've come off mute, over to you.
Yeah, it's a tough one indeed, but I think Stephen has already mentioned that first and foremost, it's a long-term investment that you're looking at. You make money around the real estate, and what you do with your cargo as an airport, that's where your money, how you make money is that the real estate, being a logistic real estate provider. What you do around that in order to facilitate the cost of it and the price of it is making sure that you create an ecosystem of people to attract that business, and also obviously on the cost side, making sure that you do it as attractively and as cost efficient as possible, the construction and the maintenance of the property management. And that goes back to the first and foremost, as an airport, you're an infrastructure provider. And one in the real estate, but also two in some of the more digital elements, such as also the digital infrastructure elements, and three 3 as a facilitator towards governments. With digital, there's money to be made. With the real estate, there's money to be made. But when it comes back to the more cargo industry, then obviously the operators making use of your infrastructure, they make their own business case on how to operationalize within the infrastructure that you provide the need for cargo and cargo flows. But I think that's a very much an airport's perspective that I underscore here, what Stephen already told. But I think that's how I look at this as well. The role of the airport, and this is facilitating the long-term strategy, and it's a long-term story. The role of the handlers, forwards, operates over there is more making sure that the short term you can do this efficiently and effectively within that infrastructure.
Thank you.
Steve. Can I add something to that one?
Yeah, of course.
And I'm probably going to insult some of the passenger people, but working on the passenger side for an airport is pretty easy when it comes to calculation. You can very easily quick how much money you make from a passenger airline landing on your airport. When it comes to cargo, it's more complex. Yes, you can calculate landing and takeoff and some direct revenues, but if you really want to manage cargo properly as an airport, also on the financials and the P&L, you need to have like a P&L cargo. Having a long-term strategy, that's one pillar. The second one that you need to really stand strong is having a dedicated P&L with all costs and all revenues allocated, because then you can make wise decisions. Today, too many decisions on cargo are made on non-complete numbers, and then you make mistakes because the passenger people do underestimate the complexity and the wide scope of cargo. And if you have a really good view on the numbers and the figures and the full impact on your airport, then you will also see what generates the benefit. We've had examples when I was in my previous role, we have had examples where we could make the business case for a long-haul passenger flight work based on the volumes and the yield of cargo we could generate. Without this kind of element and this kind of numbers to bring to the table, you start underestimating the value of cargo. So to all the airport people, make sure you have your act together when it comes on cargo and the impact of cargo.
Thank you. And presumably as well, I mean, I hate to say it, but we have seen this pandemic, and the forecast is it will happen again at some point. And if cargo has been so critical to providing, you know, the lifeblood of revenue for many airports, airlines, handlers, that you would want to maintain a capability to service it again, right? Because at some point this may happen again. Hopefully it doesn't, but 100 years, 50 years, whatever it takes, I would have thought that as a you know, as in terms of managing risk, whatever your business, you would want cargo as part of your repertoire.
Yeah, but and even more important, it's nice to see the impact of cargo, but the fact that cargo makes money is at all times. It's not during pandemics, it's not during crisis. Cargo is a sustainable part of your business, and this is how airports should look at it. And it's not because that is the risk, that everybody jumps on it because now it was sexy and nice and it brought in cash. But also tomorrow, cargo needs to get that attention, and the only way you can give it structural attention is if you can also convince your board that it makes money and it brings value to you as an airport operator. Cargo is not a dirty side of the airport. It's not something that is in the corner. It makes money and it generates benefits for your stakeholders and your shareholders. And that element is still not understood enough today at many airports.
We're running low on time. We've got about 6-7 minutes to go. Perhaps just summing up from, and I'll come to you on this one for some final thoughts, but I mentioned it at the start, you'll have all seen it many times, but the IATA data on demand keeps going up, you know, double-digit increases on a couple of years ago. Capacity is dropping. I mean, what would be the single most influential thing you think that airports, the community to do could close that gap? Because at the moment we seem to be stretching. Demand goes up, capacity falls away, which doesn't seem like the you know, most logical outcome when you know, we're looking to develop business here. So there's some closing thoughts really on the single most influential thing you think that led by airports, the community can do to address this capacity crunch. And a gold star for who's brave enough to go first on that one. Who's feeling? Henry, yeah, there you go, gold star coming to you. Thank you.
No, Max, but I think it's having the benefit of not being an airport, but you could say the it's very much up to airports to take a decision. I mean, you've heard about some of the comments from those who have more intimate relationship work-wise with an airport than I do. It's about, as an airport, to take a decision up front. What am I? Am I an infrastructure developer, so kind of a private equity? Am I in this to finance this? Or am I in this to administrate a certain piece of land and make sure that first line, second line is distributed well and activity is created? If you are in it as an investor, well, then you have to make sure you understand you're in it for the long run. There might be some ups and downs, but you are basically in it for the long run. If you're just there to optimize the rental of land, you can allow yourself a more short-term perspective.
Thank you, Henrik.
For me, it's a question of what does the owner of the airport, what is their perspective in terms of horizon and type of investment?
Thank you. Good. I'll come to you. You just came off mute at the wrong time, I think, but I'll come to you just for your sort of final thoughts on the most influential thing that you think could be done to address this capacity crunch.
Well, one of the things I found coming into the industry was that the lack of visibility. I know infrastructure obviously is key, but that's long term. But if you look at the short term, I truly believe in the macroeconomics of things. Certainly, capacity and demand will diverge and converge cyclically, and it will converge towards each other again. Now you'll find a balance point. But so I think what needs to be addressed on the short term is getting the visibility how that shortage of capacity can be fully optimized, and with visibility, then obviously I think today is a time to work on that digitization, provided visibility, and as an airport you can certainly play a key role in that together with your local community. Thank you.
Who wants to go? I'll go to you, Steve.
Yeah. I think short term, running behind facts and reality. If you want to solve that capacity problem, that's not going to help, and airports have only very limited power to do something on that. I think the role of the airport is look at the long term and create a right environment to do good business. And that will prevent issues and problems that the different stakeholders who can manage this capacity, who can provide extra capacity, can do. We should make life easier of handlers, airlines and forwarders as an airport. And in future, when there is a crisis, they can focus on what they are best placed in, making sure the goods go from A to B as quickly as possible. And creating that environment is crucial. For me, the airport, they should play the role of conductor of the orchestra. Don't take an instrument in your hands yourself. You don't need to play anything. Just make sure that the orchestra can play optimal and make it a very nice musical play. And I think that's the role the airports need to take care of.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thomas, I'll come to you for your final thoughts.
Yeah, I will just be very quick. No, we at GBT are just supporting the industry since day one, the cargo industry. We developed and designed the first cargo loader, back in 1969. We also developed and designed the first electrical cargo loader back in 1987. So we're in the industry that we need to adapt. We need to be very flexible, and we need to, adjust, our technology. The best we can do today is to support our customer with the best products, that we have, and with the best technical support on site. I think this is from my end, this is my my vision of the cargo. So it's very important that we are working with the industry to provide the right product at the right time and with the right technology. So yeah.
Thomas, thank you very much. Bill, I'll come to you.
Sure. So from a single most important thing as an airport, we think that's having a strategic plan for 5, 10, 15 years, 20 years out. And that includes your digital infrastructure. It includes your landside, airside, real estate management. It's all encompassing of all those different aspects. But you have to have that strategic plan, and that starts with kind of understanding your market. You have to understand what kind of verticals you're having in your cargo that the forwarders are carrying. So do I need nose load capabilities? Do I need oversized cargo capabilities? And invest in those infrastructure pieces that are going to take you towards that strategic plan. And that's not just having community systems, but it's also providing things like 5G connectivity for the cargo ecosystem on the airport. And so that strategic plan is going to drive you and guide you through all those investments.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bill. And finally, Stephen.
Well, I think a lot has been said, and we all agree that we need to invest in infrastructure, and at the same time we need to make sure it is used efficiently, because we cannot keep building new warehouses to accommodate the growth. If we use existing warehouses more efficient, that would help as well. But something I also want to emphasize is that we need to invest in people, both the airport and the cargo community. We have put something in place in Liège, which is called Liège Airport Academy, where we actually ask our cargo community, the handlers, the freight forwarders, the customs clearance, what do you need? Which jobs do you need? And how can we assist in setting up training programs with those who do training programs, to provide these people, because it's all good to have the infrastructure, but in the end we need people, and we need young people to come into our industry. We don't only need people who push boxes, we need them as well, but we need the young people to come and see it as it's not the dirty part, it's the sexy part of the airport, and we want the people to come and join us at the sexy part of the airport, which is the cargo operation.
A good strapline for the marketing, a sexy part of the airport operation for cargo for next time. But we do have a session tomorrow on that skills issue, so a very valid point that you raised there at the close, and we'll be looking at that one in a bit more depth as to how we attract the talent that is going to be needed. For now, to all of our panel, thank you so much for your time and your contributions. Really enjoyed our conversation and getting your views. We look forward to various people contributing on and off for the rest of the sessions, but thank you very much for today, and we look forward to following the story. Everyone is free to leave apart from Stephen, who you're staying on to do our next presentation, but to everyone else, thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.